Thank you, Mayor Rice. I'm going to take a second here just to switch. You all are very quiet. You know, we have a whole community meeting every Monday and Friday with the whole school, about this many people, about 100 people more than this in our school. We meet in the foyer of the school, stand in a circle and share, celebrate, share announcements and performances and inspiration together, and it's right before lunch, so I'm very careful about monitoring time, and when students start to get unruly, I say it's your lunch, but I don't know what to do if you guys start to get unruly. So hang in there with me. I'm going to make some remarks, tell a bit of a story, try to focus not so much on Manual High School, though I think that's a very unique story, but more on the policy context that is allowing us to achieve some of the things we're achieving, and then I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. And I really appreciate Mayor Rice giving some background on the school. If I can pick up where he left off or a little later, it's true that I was a graduate of Manual High School, and I was bused into Manual in the first class that was bused by court order starting in 1975. So my 3 years of high school, I was a white kid bused in from a suburban neighborhood to attend Manual High School, and prior to that, it had been mostly African-American students at the school, and during my years there, it was pretty much half white, half black. There were small numbers of Asian and Latino students in the school as well. And that continued for about 20 years, and many people see that as a second heyday of the school because there were so many higher performing, more affluent students who were getting into Ivy League colleges and scoring high on test scores, and one sort of minor symbol to me is we went from state basketball champions to state lacrosse champions during those times. But really, the needs of the lower income students who lived in the neighborhood were never very well served. And when court order busing stopped in the mid-1990s, at the same time as the standards movement was taking hold and the whole notion of having state standardized tests, the level of performance of low-income students in our urban high schools in Denver and everywhere in the country became very clearly exposed. So for the next 5 or 6 years, they grappled with, or probably close to 10 years, they grappled with a variety of attempted solutions to the challenge of educating low-income kids or kids from low-income households with very mixed but mostly poor results. And finally, by 2006, the Board of Education looked at the school. It was terrible in terms of student attrition, student graduation rates, student test scores, crime and violence in the school and the neighborhood, and they decided to close it down and try a restart a year later. So that's when I came onto the picture, and at that time I was, I also want to clarify, I know I was this head of a private school in Denver, probably I think Denver's oldest independent school with an affluent student population and 100% of those kids going on to college. But prior to that, I was in public schools, and I ran a small public school that actually served 4 school districts, and we had control over 100% of our budget and all of our staff and all of our programs. And so I just want to clarify that there's this notion of like the private school guy, but for me, I felt much more comfortable in a public environment. But also, I learned a lot of things about private schools and about how when you can control your own budget and control your own destiny, and address issues on site instead of working for a bureaucracy or a board far, far away, you can probably be more effective in educating your students. So I was looking for a change in part because I felt I needed more fulfillment than I was getting in an independent school. And Manual High School was certainly a challenging opportunity. I don't know if it was, I was looking at it as a fulfilling opportunity. I'm still not sure I look at it as a fulfilling opportunity every day when I go to work. But I applied for the job, and it took them a long time to decide what to do about filling that position. Finally, in March, when I'd pretty much given up, the superintendent called and offered me the job, and I said, no, it's too late. There's no way that we can open a school in August, and my job doesn't end until July, and he was offering me a start date of July 2. So I said, not a chance. He said, is there anything you would do to reconsider? And I went and spent a couple days calling friends of mine, college professors, principals at other schools, educators I knew, community leaders, and asked them, are there any conditions under which it would make sense to accept this job at this time? And it pretty much distilled to 3 things. You need to be able to get control over the people you hire. You need to be able to get control over your educational programs, and you need to have access to adequate resources, and you need to be able to direct them where they need to go. So my wife said, don't do it. There's no way. And all of you know that, does anybody in the room think they're smarter than their spouse here? Yeah. So she made a bet with me. She said, no way, it won't work. And my stance was this, that, you know, I've been in these schools that are pretty autonomous, and we have to make do with limited resources. Here I'm going to be in this large district with all these people, all this expertise, all these resources at my disposal. If I have a question, I can call experts in special education, I can call psychologists, I can call people who know all these things, and they'll be there to help me. She said, don't do it, it won't work. So we made a bet. And you know, the bet was really essentially, can all the resources and all the energies at our disposal in a large urban school district really serve the needs of a single school? So with 3 promises from the superintendent and that bet with my wife, you know, the promises were that we would have flexibility to hire our own staff and control of our programs and access to ample resources at our disposal that we could use flexibly. I accepted the position. And as you can imagine, I lost the bet. The management environment, I was just sort of thinking about how to represent this concept very simply the other day. I was looking on the internet, and this is an organizational chart with arrows going every which way of the the chief academic officer and his or her staff in Denver Public Schools. So each of these boxes represents what they call an instructional superintendent, who has a staff of about 10 people they call instructional specialists who help schools succeed. Now, none of these people actually have jobs in schools, right? They're all itinerant, or they all work in the central office. One of them is my direct supervisor. And then, of course, there's offices like student services with health services, psych services, and all those things. The budget combined of these offices is approximately $189 million in Denver Public Schools, approximately $2,700 per student. Now remember, these are all off-site services which we have at our disposal. But this is only part of it. I started thinking about all the operations side of the organization. I've got the school board and the superintendent on top of that. I got me way down at the bottom, and then all these other organizations to which I'm beholden. And I just added a few directional arrows to show the line of command. And this is death by 1,000 arrows if I've ever seen it, or death by 1,000 cuts. So this is the organizational environment in which a typical public school works. And by the way, I just got numbers from the chief financial officer 2 days ago in Denver Public Schools. He was slapping his own forehead. He was shocked that the central budget for all of these things is about $291 million, about $4,100 per kid. And again, I repeat, these are not services, most of which reside on site, which serve students on site. And certainly none of them are services over which we on site have control. Okay. The other environment is the regulatory environment that I work in, and I don't know if any of you have seen this movie, Super Size Me, but it's about a guy who consumes a month's worth of fast food at a fast food restaurant and becomes incredibly fat and unhealthy. And I had this fantasy after a few weeks on the job. By the way, this is just a snapshot of my policy bookshelf in my office. These are all the regulations manuals for Denver Public Schools and Colorado Department of Education. And I have this fantasy that if I just answered every email and responded to every demand or request or communication from the central office, how long would it take me to do? And by my calculation, it would be about an 80 or a 90 hour a week job just to stay on top of the inordinate demand that they make on you, none of which is really targeted towards student learning. We have 603 pages of school laws in Colorado. Lee showed you a much larger book. 680 Board of Education policies. I just wanted to single out one to illustrate by example. State statute requires that schools have what they call a school advisory council, and it's a very good idea that a school should have a committee of the school principal, a couple teachers, a couple parents, and a business leader in the community that meets 4 times a year to review the school's budget, to look at the educational program, and to make sure there's a good plan for parent communication and parent engagement. So that's what this one-page statute on the right explains. And on the left is the 31-page handbook for Denver Public Schools operationalization of the School Advisory Council. They changed the name and added 30 pages of bureaucracy to the process. So I'm going to get to this later. Manual High School is able to reduce down to the one-page version and walk away from the 31-page version through our innovation plan. We have a 98-page union agreement under which we operate. I think that's pretty typical of school districts. One of my favorite provisions in the entire contract is a simple one. Each school will have a desk and a chair for each teacher except in unusual circumstances. Now, I've been pondering this. I was trained in literature, actually. I have a graduate degree in pretty much in humanities, studied a lot of literature. I see this as a line of poetry because there's so much embedded in this simple sentence. And I imagine a group of teachers and administrators and school board members sitting in a room for days on end, which is how long it takes to negotiate the contract every few years, contemplating, well, we want a desk and a chair. No, you can have a desk or a chair. All right, you can have a desk and a chair except in unusual circumstances. So imagine how long it took to get the wording of this single absurd sentence, and look at what that reflects in terms of the working relations in schools, the level of trust. Right? I mean, can you imagine being a young, starry-eyed teacher what are you looking for in a job? Well, a desk and a chair for each teacher. It's just, this is the environment we're working in. And I also want to point the finger at the administration on this one, because there are teachers who feel they need these assurances codified in order to be able to do their jobs. And so this is not a bash the teachers, bash the union notion. It's that the relations have broken down because of poor management and because we're focusing on the wrong things. I do have a fantasy, though, which is that they'd spent a little bit longer. They could have removed a couple syllables and turned it into a union agreement haiku. So anyway, what happened about a year ago is in Colorado, the state legislature took a look at this environment and did something I think very smart. They passed an act called the Innovation Schools Act, allowing schools to apply for conditions under which they could operate differently. And I want to walk through just some of the main aspects of the Innovation Schools Act in Colorado. The notion is that a school can request waivers from all sorts of policies and regulations at the district, at the union, the district, and the state level. We don't waive federal regulations, so No Child Left Behind, IDEA. There's federal legislation that the state obviously can't waive and doesn't waive. But we can waive, literally thousands of pages of bureaucracy and put together a simple plan demonstrating how schools will comply with the spirit or the intent of those regulations, but do things differently. Schools can do this on their own, or they can do this as a collaborative, as a zone of schools or a group of schools. And then it must be approved by the district board of education first, and then the state board of education second. So the district board has to sign off and agree to the plan the school puts in place. But it includes those three important things: innovations in personnel, in educational services, and in budgeting. That is, it gives the school decision-making authority over those three things. The statute in Colorado is very liberal, I guess, in terms of allowing schools this leeway, because it says that they must approve the plan unless it likely will result in lower academic achievement or would be fiscally unfeasible. Now, that's the state boards. The school district board has whatever threshold they want to set for themselves. It requires a 60% approval by the staff in the school or the staff affected by the plan. And then there's a process in the statute that says it must be reviewed every 3 years to make sure that schools are living up to the terms of the plan, and also that it's working in terms of student achievement. So we seized this opportunity. We're actually the first. There were two schools, an elementary school and a high school. We in this elementary school, we submitted the first two plans and were awarded. Were allowed to go in this direction for the first time in Colorado. I also want to emphasize there's some important differences between charters and innovation schools. They're governed directly by the Board of Education of the school district. Staff are district employees. The principal, I'm hired by the district, and my boss is one of those instructional superintendents, or the superintendent ultimately is my boss. We're still under district compensation, and we can't opt out of the different district benefits package. And plans can be narrow or broad. So when we wrote our plan, we wrote it very broadly and took on the entire scope of educational programs. But you could choose to make a very narrow plan for a program within a school or something like that. So let me just tell you a little bit about some of the things that we envisioned, that we wrote into our plan, and then some of the ways we've actually implemented since that time. First is personnel. According to our plan, we can recruit and hire our own teachers. So we've been able to waive some of the licensure requirements, of course not the federal licensure requirements of NCLB, but many of the state licensure requirements, and this is especially important for administrators. So I don't have any administrators. I happen to be a licensed administrator myself, but none of the other staff in the school are licensed administrators. They're all on a teacher contract, and they have additional duties for additional pay, very much like how it would work in a law firm, right? I don't think you need a state license to be managing partner of a law firm either. Staff job descriptions, we've designed on-site our own staff job descriptions, and we had our teachers vote to approve that. In fact, we got a 92% vote, not just a 60% vote in approving our plan. And then our teacher evaluation reflects our expectations on site. We've defined what we think good teaching needs to look like, what kind of student achievement results we want to see, and that's how we're evaluating our teachers. Teachers were willing to waive district grievance procedures, which incidentally in the contract is a 7-page process, and we have a simple single paragraph that defines our grievance procedure. They waived the entire union contract. And our teachers are at will. So any teacher hired since the innovation plan went into effect are at will employees, and they're not eligible for tenure in the district. And then we were allowed to add different kinds of pay structures on top of the teacher-based pay. So our teachers did not waive their salaries with the district, but we can agree on things they can do, either performance incentives or tasks that they perform for additional pay for additional work. Programmatically, completely reconceptualized time, so we have a different calendar schedule. School day, curriculum, assessment, instruction, and professional development are all very different in the school. So specifically, budgeting as well. We receive per pupil budgeting from the district of about $4,500 per student. Now, if you recall from those I think second or third slide, the district is still holding $4,100 of funds that, in my view, could be allocated out to the school level. Part of that is we're not completely in agreement philosophically yet. Part of that is we've had less than 12 months under the innovation plan, and we're still working out. I mean, the district's budget is so complex, it took them years to even figure out where their dollars were. So now our task this year is to figure out how do we slice off allocations for the school. But we also receive dollars for teachers instead of teacher allocations. Anybody who knows anything about how virtually all schools are staffed, numbers of teachers will be given to the school based on usually student enrollment or some other allocation methodology. The problem with that, especially with urban high schools, is that teachers in urban schools tend to be less experienced and oftentimes less educated than teachers who work their way up to work like in the AP classes or in the affluent suburban high schools. And so if you follow the dollars, the dollars are going much more to more affluent kids than are going to low-income kids. So by taking the real dollars instead of just an allocation, it allows us to hire more less expensive teachers who are more likely drawn to urban schools. And it also, of course, gives us flexibility. If I want to convert FTEs to different kind of jobs, I can do that on site. And then we have the right to purchase services from the district, or if we don't like the quality of service, we can take those dollars and we can purchase them elsewhere. And that includes student services, transportation, food services, facilities, maintenance. Just for example, pretty much any department on that organizational chart, if I'm not satisfied with their services, guess what? I can say thank you very much, I'm going to go to another provider, or I'm going to provide those in-house. Do want to emphasize that freedom comes with accountability. And according to both the state statute and to our plan, we will have an annual evaluation of the school which focuses on student achievement. So we can't just, and if, because ours is an annual review, we're held accountable annually. If we don't show results, then they can revoke all or part of the plan. So some of the specific things I'll share that we've done in terms of programs is we have a different mission from the district, and I'm not saying all schools should have our mission, but we looked at this school, which was historically so strong and recently so weak, and so few kids were college going in the last 20 years, and we said, let's prepare every kid for college. In fact, we made college a graduation requirement. And we narrowed our academic program. We got rid of a lot of the additional offerings, and we pretty much focused our program on what we need to do to prepare students for college. We took an instructional model which is very unique in most schools, but actually borrowed from a lot of charter schools that are far outperforming most schools in terms of student achievement levels with low-income students. And TFA, Teach for America, has been a real influence of a lot of our instructional practices. We took the district semester and we divided into trimester. We divided those into 6-week units. So every 6 weeks we're giving an assessment, tracking student progress, looking at data, changing instruction, regrouping students so that students don't get 6 months behind. Every 6 weeks we're tracking where they are and intervening as necessary. We have the longest school day and the longest school year in the district. Our school day goes from 7 in the morning to 3:45 p.m. That's our teaching day, so it's a 7 3/4 hour teaching day. And then from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock we have after school activities, athletics, and some elective classes. And our teachers, I want to emphasize, voted in favor of increasing their school day 2 hours longer than the typical Denver high school. 2 weeks of summer development is in our teacher contract, though we pay teachers for those additional 2 weeks. And we have this advisory program in the school because we know that our students have social and emotional needs that we need to address if we're going to get them ready for college, if we're going to get them through high school. So all teachers in the school are advisors, and they have a group of 15 advisees, sort of a caseload of students who they are on every day, all day. If a kid doesn't come to school, the advisor calls them at home and says, where are you? The teachers have the advisors have parent conferences twice per year. We have 90% attendance at our parent conferences. So this is a real strong emphasis of the school, is building those relationships with students and families, and we do it through this sort of pyramid scheme. Instead of having one counselor for 300 students, we have one advisor for 15. So people, this is a job that teachers designed, and it's a job where teachers can succeed. And in fact, when we had negotiations with the union, of course they started out hostile to the notion of innovation, hostile to the notion of waiving the stipulations in the union contract, which regulates specifically how many minutes you have for planning, how many minutes you have for lunch, what's the maximum class size. But when I sat down with the president of the Denver Teachers Union and showed her what our job description is for teachers, she said, wow, all teachers should have working conditions like this. So basically, it's a 3-core block per day. That's three classes of an hour and a quarter. Core classes, math, science, English, or social studies. An intervention or an elective class for another hour. So if a kid needs remediation in math, reading, or writing, the teacher will teach that. We also have electives in arts, music, drama, etc. for students who are ready to move on to those things. Advisory 4 times per week. Our maximum class size, or our typical class size, is less than 25. We have no classes over 25 in this school. The district's maximum class size is 35, and that's a very typical number. Our student load, that is the number of students that a teacher sees per day and has to keep track of and has to know, is 75, which is less than half of the number of students in a typical high school. So they're grading 75, not 150 pagers, 150 students' papers, and they're developing relationships with 75, not 150, 175 students. We have a half day for professional development every week. We scrunch our schedule on Thursdays so that there's about 3 hours of professional development, much of which is teacher directed. And then teachers are guaranteed 75 minutes of planning, whereas the union contract guarantees them 40 minutes of planning every day. So this is not, let's see how we can get more from teachers. It's how we can support teachers and create a job where they're going to succeed and do well for their students. Budget and operations is really, I mean, from my perspective as a manager, where we have the most latitude to change. Because we have real dollars instead of FTEs, as you can see here, the typical teacher salary in Denver Public Schools is $65,000. Our average is about $39,000. So we can hire 40% more teachers than the district can by getting real dollars instead of by getting just allocated FTEs. And then we use spending flexibly right now within categories. So for example, district gave us a allocation of 1 psychologist per week, 3 social worker, 1 day of psychology services per week, 3 days of social work service per week. And we looked at that and said, well, wait a minute. We can afford, if we just take all those dollars, we can pay a full-time social worker to provide a full-time mental health services for our students. And the reason we needed a psychologist instead of a social worker is to perform psych testing for some of our students with special needs who need that occasionally. So we set aside $10,000 and we are outsourcing our psych testing on a per case basis. And so far this year we've only spent a couple $1,000s, so we way over budgeted in that category. Otherwise, we would have been paying the district $15,000 for 1 day of psych services. It would have been Mondays. It wouldn't have mattered when we needed the psychologist. It wouldn't have mattered what tests we offered. And it wouldn't have mattered if that person had somewhere else to be on Monday. They wouldn't be at manual that day. So by having this flexibility, we've been able to convert to more resources and target those resources more around our needs. And then the other thing we're experimenting with is outsourcing some of our instructional services. So for example, we've contracted with a company that teaches adults and travelers Spanish for business and travel. And instead of having a Spanish teacher in the school, we purchase services. And sometimes there's 3 different teachers teaching at the same time during our electives block to students at all different levels. Because we have native Spanish speakers, we have kids who have never, who are very beginning Spanish speakers in the school. And this is a way for us to more economically provide better instruction. We've partnered with community organizations for artists in residence to teach drama and music and art. We're just not limited to the typical teacher job. Things we're looking at down the road are security, food services, facility management, transportation. When I showed this list a couple weeks ago to the Central Administration in Denver Public Schools, they nearly had a heart attack. But we said, like food services, none of our kids, 85% of our students qualify for free lunch. Less than half of them eat that lunch. So we went to the district and said, this ain't working. You guys are spending this money and our kids are entitled to a quality service. Well, there's another competing food service in town from whom we can purchase lunch services. We don't have to do this ourselves. And all we need to do is contract with them. The money is coming for free lunch largely through the federal government. So we've told the district next year, we're just going to purchase services from this company called Revolution Foods. It was very interesting, their response. The first answer is always, no, you can't do that. And then I show them the innovation plan, I show them the state statute, I ask them to call their own lawyer to get an opinion. And then they come back and they say, well, can we work with you to see if we can put together a better program for your students? So how about that? I mean, that's a win-win, right? I don't win necessarily by taking our dollars and purchasing them outside of the district, but suddenly the district itself is being pressured to innovate and pressured to change. So I'm really delighted. We finally have the kind of leverage where we're either going to get good service, or instead of engaging in all the conflict that I always have to engage in to get service for my students, I can walk away and I can go purchase it elsewhere. So, is it working? First answer is we don't really know. It's really too soon to tell. Be honest. We only passed our plan a year ago, less than a year ago. So my feeling is we're moving in the right direction. We haven't worked out the kinks, but we'll have to give it more time. The second answer, though, is yes. We have very strong, positive preliminary results. We are, Denver Public Schools has what they call a performance framework that's an indicator of school performance along test scores, student attendance, on track to graduate, parent engagement, student engagement. They have all these ways of measuring school performance overall, and it's not a bad report card for student performance. Manual High School, remember, was the lowest scoring school in the state of Colorado when it was closed down, and now we're the 3rd ranking high school in Denver Public Schools. that we are the highest ranking Title I school in Denver. So the high poverty high school, we were #1 in both test scores, that is achievement levels, and in growth we outperformed Denver Public Schools in the state of Colorado. We have the higher attendance rate than Denver Public Schools, and we have higher attendance than any other Title I high school. So it feels to me like things are working pretty well, and the more latitude we have on site to determine our destiny, the more control we have over our own resources, the more hope I have for the future. I think there's a legitimate answer to say, no, it isn't working, because we're still working out with the district. Like you saw, we right now have a discretionary budget of $4,500. They still control $4,100, and we're looking to see if we can implement the Innovation Act to a greater degree at this school. So I guess what I'll leave you with is, what do you need to make it happen? First of all, I strongly endorse innovation schools as either a statute or as a policy. And I've sort of simplified our story, and I want to back up and say that before the state legislature passed the Innovation Schools Act, we took the lead with another school in Denver and submitted a plan to Denver Public School Board of Education that asked for autonomy. We called it an autonomy agreement. And it was virtually the same proposal as we turned into a plan to become an innovation school that gave us site-based control of many of these things. And the district actually agreed to it with us, and the union actually agreed to it with us, because 100% of our teachers voted in favor of it. And it was very hard for the union off-site to say, when 100% of your teachers are asking for this, we're going to say no. So I would say there are steps you can take at a district level prior to waiting for the state legislature to change the law. But a couple things that we have at Manual High School that are important that I would just keep an eye on are systems capacity. That is, when you take on more work on site and more responsibility on site, you need to have the systems and you need to have the staff in place to do it. So I'm the CEO, I guess I'm the academic director of the school as well, but I have a business manager who has a strong business background. In fact, she and I was the head of this independent school, and she was my business manager there, and for some reason I still don't understand. When I told her where I was going, she said, "I want to go with you. That sounds like a really great job." And it's a terrible job for her, but she and I have been great partners, and she has a lot of the financial and management skills that educators don't typically have. So we've built both systems capacity and human capacity in our own skill sets. And I know a lot of principals aren't ready for this, and I know I've had more training and more experience to grow into a broader range of responsibilities as a manager than most principals get, working in a tightly controlled command control structure like a typical district. But you can develop principles for that. I think where we're looking at developing in the future in Denver is more systems capacity. We're this odd duck. There's now about 4 innovation schools in Denver, and they're trying to figure out how to build capacity to respond to our requests, how to even find the dollars that we're demanding and allocate them to the school, because their budgeting process doesn't work that way. So systems still have to evolve, and the whole district has to evolve in terms of their human understanding of the kind of relationships we're developing. But I guess I'll close with this question and take whatever questions you have. What's so innovation about being flexible to focus on your mission? Yeah.